Hello and welcome back, everyone. This is Sip&Talk, EP409.
Are you sure it's 409? I feel like with all the series splits, the EP101 and 102, we're probably way past that number. Longtime listeners will know what I mean.
Okay, maybe. But stop. I had this wild idea recently. You want to hear it? How to make North Korea our best friend.
That sounds intriguing. Go on, explain.
Okay, listen. What if you commit a serious crime, we just send you to North Korea? Wouldn't that?
Is this some kind of unique international cooperation program you're proposing?
Exactly. Win-win. They get resources. We maybe, just maybe, see a huge drop in crime rates.
It's quite the thought experiment. Would anyone actually want to hear more about this? Let us know in the comments.
Yeah.
Anyway, people really responded to our previous chats about illegal immigration and crime.
Yeah, imagine everyone's happy. We pay North Korea. They manage the prisoners for us.
All right. Let's park that idea for later, maybe. Shall we?
Okay. Let's get into today's topic.
Good idea.
Today, we're really diving deep into illegal immigration and border policy, the conflict between logic and emotion.
Yep. We've got a lot to unpack: data, real incidents, policy examples from around the world. It's all about that constant clash, isn't it? The logic versus the feelings.
Absolutely. We've got firsthand accounts, solid data, case studies. For example, our friend Mickey shared an observation from his show about perspectives from Taiwanese housewives.
Oh, yeah. The point about Southeast Asian folks sometimes sitting on the ground in groups.
Right. Often in air-conditioned places or really anywhere convenient. They're just hanging out totally innocently. But sometimes, they might block walkways or paths.
And the observation was that from a local Taiwanese cultural perspective, that can feel, a bit disorderly or just optically not quite right.
Exactly. So we'll touch on those microcultural things too. But let's start with the big picture, maybe in the U.S.
Sounds good. So looking at the U.S., a huge part of the debate, honestly, often kicks off with optics.
You mean those really jarring images we sometimes see? Like the criticism that arresting someone who's maybe lived here illegally for, say, 20 years, especially doing it in front of their kids, it's just horrifying to witness.
Well, yeah. And sometimes it feels like it's meant to be horrifying, that powerful emotional image. It can definitely be used, let's say, as political leverage.
Right.
The logical counterargument, though, which often gets drowned out, is pretty simple. Being part of a family doesn't make you immune to the law. I mean, think about it. If someone was arrested for, tax fraud or something, they'd also be separated from their family. That's just how law enforcement works.
So the risk is, if you focus only on how it looks, the sort of S or optics, you basically hand over your judgment to whoever frames the most emotionally powerful picture.
Pretty much. You let the narrative control the logic. And that leads right into the next big logical sticking point in the U.S. discussion. The whole reward structure idea.
The argument that's saying, okay, you've lived here illegally for 20 years, worked maybe, so now you get a path to citizenship, that it basically rewards the initial act of breaking the law.
Yeah. It sets up this precedent. It kind of incentivizes doing it the quote-unquote wrong way. And think about the unfairness, the sheer injustice to people who did follow the rules.
Right.
People who waited years, maybe decades, filling out forms, paying fees, doing everything by the book. And then someone else essentially cuts the line, like at the bank, or worse, a hospital queue, and they suddenly get bumped ahead. Procedurally, that's a massive issue for a lot of people.
Okay, I totally get the procedural fairness argument, the moral frustration, but let me play devil's advocate on the pure logic side for a sec. If the ultimate goal is like national stability and efficiency, wouldn't a huge one-time amnesty, even if it feels wrong to some, actually be the most logical way to just stop pouring resources into chasing, 11 million people, and instead you bring them into the system paying taxes?
That's the really tough, pragmatic compromise, isn't it? And we'll see other countries wrestling with exactly that later on. But the critics of that amnesty approach, they immediately point to what they see as a terrible knock-on effect. Yeah. If skipping the line ultimately pays off, it dramatically boosts the value proposition of, sneaking into the country. And that, in turn, directly funds and encourages the whole organized criminal network of human trafficking and smuggling. So you might solve one immediate problem, but you potentially fuel a much bigger, darker one.
That's a sobering point. And we should probably clarify other thing that came up often, this idea that maybe illegal residents only committed that one single act crossing the border without permission. But the reality seems more complicated.
Yeah, that's often an incomplete picture. It's not just the crossing. Many times there are other violations layered on top. Things like using false documents, maybe identity theft to get a job, making false statements, or not paying certain taxes they should have, like Social Security. It's rarely just one single thing.
Okay, which brings us to, well, the really thorny issue. Allocating resources. This is where it gets really heated, doesn't it? Money, housing, healthcare, they're all finite. So logically, is it morally right to prioritize spending taxpayer money on, let's say, random foreigners, no matter how sad their story, when you might have your own citizens, like homeless veterans, needing help?
This is often framed as the betrayal argument, the idea that a nation's first duty, its core obligation, is to its own citizens, people who've lived there, worked, paid taxes, sometimes for generations.
Right.
So diverting significant public funds to non-citizens or even other governments, even for humanitarian reasons, feels like a fundamental breaking of that promise to a lot of people. It pits that sort of logic of self-preservation against the emotion of global empathy.
Okay, so if the U.S. example kind of shows the pitfalls of inadvertently rewarding illegal entry, let's look overseas. How are other countries trying to maybe dismantle that reward structure? Let's take the U.K.
Right. The UK's recent approach, especially with their Illegal Migration Act 2023, seems like an attempt at pure, cold legal logic. They've tried to strengthen repatriation, expand their detention capabilities, and this is the key part of explicitly block people who enter illegally from accessing the normal asylum system.
The thinking being, if you can't even get your foot in the legal door through that route, then the incentive for smugglers promising that path just vanishes.
That's the idea. They're trying to make the consequence of illegal entry much more immediate and certain, basically immediate return. It changes the whole risk-reward calculation.
Okay.
But, the tension is immediate and intense. This hardline logical approach crashes straight into the incredibly complex and, frankly, emotionally charged world of international human rights law, especially things like the 1951 Refugee Convention. So the UK government finds itself constantly fighting legal battles brought by human rights groups. It's logic versus emotion played out daily in the courts.
Then you've got Japan. Their situation seems a bit different, more about dealing with visa overstayers, right? Selective strictness.
Yeah, that's largely true. Their main issue isn't border crossing so much as people staying after their visas expire. They had, nearly 75,000 such cases in early 2025, mostly from places like Vietnam and Thailand.
And the irony is Japan desperately needs workers, right? Like a massive structural labor shortage looming.
Absolutely. They're projecting a need for something like over 6 million foreign workers by 2040. But despite that need, their policy approach is still heavily focused on control, on order. Very strict.
So needing the labor, but keeping tight control. How does that play out?
Well, for instance, their rules allow them to start repatriation proceedings after someone's third unsuccessful asylum application. They're trying to stop the asylum system being used as a way to stay indefinitely.
Okay.
But the emotional fallout, the criticism they face is significant, particularly around issues like the potentially indefinite detention of migrants waiting for deportation. It highlights that constant friction, the logical desire for national order versus, basic human rights concerns.
That idea of policy maybe not quite working as intended or having unintended consequences. That takes us nicely to Taiwan. They have this issue with fugitive workers, people who leave their contracted jobs. It's a big number, like 90,000 people, mainly Vietnamese.
Right. And Taiwan's official policy looks tough on paper. They have high fines, NT $50,000, I think, and long bans on returning, maybe 7 years. That's classic enforcement logic. Deter people from running away.
But it's not really working, is it? Because the root cause isn't necessarily the workers themselves?
Exactly. That's the key insight. The system often fails because the underlying problem is this exploitative brokerage system. Workers get hit with massive fees, sometimes putting them in debt bondage, and they're often locked into one employer. They can't easily switch jobs.
So they're almost forced to run away just to find better work or escape bad conditions, which then fuels the illegal market the policy is trying to stop. It's like the policy is punishing the symptom of a deeper failure.
It's a total paradox.
Yeah.
Taiwan's policy is trying to enforce rules against people who, in many cases, were pushed into breaking those rules by a system the government itself allows to exist.
Wow.
And what's really interesting is the compromise they're now facing. Because they need the labor, pragmatically speaking, they're actually considering some kind of amnesty or regularization for those 80,000-90,000 workers. The logical need for workers is starting to outweigh the purely enforcement-based logic.
And this is where those micro-level things, like the Mickey observation, come in. How policy failures or cultural differences play out in daily life. That point about Southeast Asians sitting on the ground.
Yeah, it's such a neat little example of that guest versus host dynamic. Anthropologically speaking, in many Southeast Asian cultures, especially where it's hot, sitting together on the ground, often in a circle, is totally normal. It's social, it's comfortable, they're not trying to be disruptive.
But in a place like urban Taiwan, the local culture values clear paths, orderliness, maybe avoiding what's seen as bad optics. It's sort of that urbanized, maybe Confucian-influenced etiquette, keep walkways clear, maintain a certain public decorum.
Exactly. So this tiny difference in habit sitting on the floor versus keeping a path clear becomes a point of friction. It's not malicious on either side, usually, but it's part of that community living room idea. When different norms bump up against each other in shared spaces, it can create low-level resentment. And those little annoyances can sometimes feed into bigger anti-immigrant feeling.
Which makes the move towards technology even more interesting because, well, AI doesn't care about cultural norms or emotions, right? This digital fortress idea.
Yeah, this is definitely the cutting edge of trying to apply pure logic to border control using AI biometrics. The EU's entry-exit system, the EES, is a prime example. They're requiring fingerprints, facial recognition for non-EU folks.
And the logic is straightforward. Manage the sheer volume of, 700 million entries a year efficiently and securely. And there was some data suggesting it was working initially, Mediterranean crossings down.
Reportedly down about 30% in early 2025. Yeah, after they started rolling out more tech. So the efficiency logic seemed to hold at first glance.
But the emotional reaction?
Oh, it was immediate and fierce. Critics slammed it as a digital fortress, raising huge privacy alarms, and worse, concerns about discrimination. There were reports showing error rates, especially for facial recognition, being significantly higher, up to 20% higher for non-white migrants.
And when the media picks up stories of people being wrongly detained because an algorithm made a mistake, it just pours fuel on the cold, unfeeling technology fire, doesn't it? Logic says efficiency, but the public sees dehumanization.
Precisely. And connect that to perhaps the biggest challenge on the horizon, climate migration. This is maybe the ultimate emotional versus logical dilemma.
Because climate change, drought in the Sahel, rising sea levels in the Pacific, it's forcing huge numbers of people to move, often without legal pathways, like 100,000 from the Sahel alone, pushing outwards.
So what's the logical response from richer nations, like in the EU? Often it's to externalize the issue. They provide funding for holding camps in transit countries like Morocco, basically to stop those large numbers from reaching their own borders and overwhelming their systems.
It's pure resource scarcity logic, right? Protect your own stability first.
It is. It's prioritizing their own citizens and infrastructure. But the emotional blowback is immense. The media shows the conditions in these camps, maybe people getting just 2 meals a day, and the public outcry is immediate. The EU gets accused of outsourcing its moral responsibilities, of washing its hands of the human suffering, even if the underlying logic is about preventing their own systems from collapsing under the strain.
So wrapping this all up, what's the takeaway for policymakers, or even just for us trying to understand this? It seems like no country can run purely on cold logic, but also maybe can't survive just on raw emotion or empathy either.
That really is the core tension, isn't it? Leaders are constantly trying to balance these powerful emotional pressures from the media, from voters, from the courts, with the need to keep the system functioning, stable, and fair according to its own rules. You need procedures, but you also need to treat people with some dignity.
And that compromise often seemed to land on something like self-deportation, which sounds harsh, but it's maybe more about procedure.
Yeah, it's not meant as punishment, usually. It's more like a middle ground. The idea is someone agrees to leave voluntarily, but in return, they might get a clearer, established process to apply legally to come back later.
Okay.
We see variations of this in the US, Japan, Taiwan has its voluntary departure schemes too. It tries to balance upholding the law with offering a path that doesn't completely shut the door forever.
Okay, so here's the final thought, the provocative question for you, the listener, to chew on. Thinking about this endless tug-of-war between logic and emotion, what's the ultimate logical cost if policy gets driven too much by surface-level empathy, by immediate emotional reactions? Is there a point where a society trying to accommodate everyone emotionally actually reaches a kind of structural breakdown?
where resources get stretched too thin, maybe social trust starts to erode, and the whole system just stops working effectively for anyone.
Yeah.
That's the knife edge, isn't it? Where do you personally draw that line between essential human compassion and maintaining the stability needed for a society to function for all its members?
Well, definitely a complex one. Well, thank you for joining us and wrestling with these ideas today on Sip and Talk.
Yes, thanks for sticking with us through this pretty heavy topic. If you found this useful or interesting, please do subscribe to the Sip and Talk podcast wherever you listen.
And hey, a big shout out again to our buddy Mickey. Go check out his YouTube channel, Mickytolife. He's got all the fun stuff, memes, music reviews, wine tasting, travel vlogs, a good way to lighten up after our deep dives.
Definitely check him out. We'll catch you next time.